but are you being too...
Welcome back to Squawk Box. A House-passed jobs bill aiming to help small businesses raising money might also weaken investor protections. SEC Chairwoman Mary Shapiro sent a letter to the Senate Banking Committee about her concerns over the bill. And joining us now to talk more about it is Banking Committee member and Republican from Pennsylvania, Senator Pat Toomey. Senator, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me. Good morning, guys.
You know, last week we had a range of politicians who came on, both Democrats and Republicans, who said that this was bipartisan legislation, that they were all in favor of this, that this would help jobs. And now it seems like we're hearing from the SEC a little late. What exactly did we hear from the SEC?
Well, Chairman Mary Shapiro has indicated she's got some reservations. Look, I understand regulators tend to support the regulatory status quo, but you're right, this bill passed with huge bipartisan support. And let's remember where it came from. Those of us who wrote parts of this, and Chuck Schumer and I wrote the part that will allow small companies to do an IPO and not be subject to the most onerous regulations immediately. They will over time, but they get a little window to kind of grow into the ability to afford that. And we didn't make these things up out of the clear blue sky. These ideas came directly from the President's Job Council and the Treasury IPO Task Force. It's endorsed by the President of the United States. It's endorsed by all kinds of business groups. And we've seen that the number of IPOs in this country have dropped. Companies' access to capital has thereby declined. So I just think this would be a very constructive measure to help growing companies raise the capital they need to keep growing and to hire more workers.
So the concerns that were raised, do you think they are legitimate concerns?
I think they're really overly overstated, let's put it this way. For instance, one of the concerns that the Chairman Shapiro raises is the fact that under our bill, a emerging growth company, one of the companies qualifying for this on-ramp to an IPO, would not be subject to the full Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, specifically 404B, which is a very expensive mandate that requires you to have outside auditors that provide audits of your internal controls and all kinds of processes. Well, this has been almost universally acknowledged as very, very expensive. There's a real question about whether it's worth it. And frankly, if investors really do value that information, then they could insist on companies providing it. But we don't need the regulators to mandate it. Let the market sort out whether that information is really needed. I'm very skeptical about it.
I guess the biggest concern is that it leaves investors open to Ponzi schemes.
You know, it really doesn't. All of the existing fraud statutes are still in place. There's all kinds of a regulatory framework that is still there. You know, fraud is every bit as illegal as it would be in the absence of this bill. So that's clearly not the case. What we simply do is we say parts of going public have become very expensive. That's why companies are doing less of it in the United States. That's why it's taking them longer to reach that stage. And so we want to give them a window of time to grow into the ability to afford the expense. I think it's pretty reasonable.
Pat, this is Bob McNair. How are you?
Great, Bob. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. If my memory serves me correct, part of the financial crisis that we went through, I don't recall that it was brought about as a result of small companies going public and defrauding the public. Do you recall any involvement on the part of small businesses and smaller IPOs being the cause of this crisis?
I sure don't. I don't think it had anything to do with small companies trying to raise the capital so that they can grow. I think the fault lies many other places.
Well, in terms of the regulations, it just seems that most of the regulations are directed about things that have happened in the past without really looking into the future. And it's the things in the future. We don't know what will happen in the future. And invariably, reacting to the past does not deal with these things that can cause problems in the future. But I don't think this was one of them. So I'm just amazed that there would be this resistance to giving small business a little slack here when they need it.
I completely agree, and I think most of the opposition is coming from the places we would normally expect it. There's very broad bipartisan support for it. And let's remember, You know, Sarbanes-Oxley was a reaction to Enron. I'm not sure it ever would have stopped Enron from happening, but why in the world we'd impose that on a small business that has nothing, no characteristics in common? It's a totally different universe. I just think this makes a lot of sense to help emerging companies raise the capital they need.
And yet, Senator Toomey, there are now several Democratic senators who are strongly opposed to this, who are voicing their opposition, including Carl Levin. What happens to this bill on the Senate floor?
So my understanding of what's going to happen, or what's likely to happen, is that Senator Reid has announced that the House-passed bill, which, mind you, had only 23 no votes and about 390 yes votes, that will be the base text, and several Democratic proposals will be offered to amend that. It's my understanding that that will require a 60-vote threshold to pass any of those amendments. I think it's unlikely that they'll be successful in watering down the bill in the ways that they would like to. So I'm hopeful that the Senate will give a big bipartisan vote to the House-passed bill with little or no changes, although reauthorizing the Exim Bank, which is a totally separate issue, might very well get included. That's quite possible. But you know, the president has indicated he wants to sign this bill. Senator Reid has said his objective is to get it to the president as quickly as possible. We could actually have some bipartisan cooperation on some very specific measures that will help improve the economy and grow jobs. Yeah, I thought that's what we're supposed to be working on in Washington.
All right, Senator Toomey, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up more today's